Hey, welcome back, friends. Great to see you here. And hopefully you can hear me okay. I've made some changes to the settings this morning, I noticed on the playback. And I'm wondering if it's just Restream that's doing it. That made the audio quite loud and distorted. So what I've done is this stream right now is not going to the other channels. It's just YouTube for the moment, and just through OBS. So if you guys would let me know if the audio is okay, if it's loud enough, if it's too quiet, if it's good, 5x5 sounds good. Appreciate that. All right, I'll listen back and see how the quality is, because we want to make it good for the people. Forgot about it. All right. Hey, Lungs, good to see you. Mark, always a pleasure, my friend. Allison. Hey, Michelle, I hope you're doing well today. And Louis T. and Chelsea and Billingtano. It's great to see everyone here. Just a few of us, and so good. Sneaking in at the last minute. I'm curious. I was considering doing this like a Rockfin exclusive, maybe free, maybe premium. I don't know. This is going to be a little bit different. Hey, thanks, Lee. I appreciate that. Just a little noodling as we do before we begin. Just to kind of both set the mood and for you and for me. It's just kind of rectal extraction stuff that I just kind of improvise in the moment, but it helps me clear my mind and try to give a better connection. So for all of us. All right. So this is going to be a little bit different. It's probably more, I mix things up and it just sort of whatever hits me. So some, like yesterday's Unintended Consequences stream was far more probably appropriate to this evening, and this evening's stream would probably be more appropriate to an Unintended Consequences stream. However, nevertheless, here we are. So let's do this, shall we? Just a few ideas that I had over, the last few hours, I think, that just kind of occurred to me as I was listening to a couple of different streams and considering a few things. Here's what we've got. And so today, I guess what I'm looking for is perhaps your feedback. This is this, and if you have, ideas about who you perhaps like to share this idea with, maybe Cameo drop by, Zach, people who like to consider these things, and maybe you like to consider such ideas. All right, the titular title today is MAJICK. What are you doing? What am I doing? What am I doing? Here is here are just some thoughts about it. Right, you probably know that I have mentioned before that I consider what we would consider magic, right? The manifestation of the will. And doing so, there is both the inside, the will of the Creator, and that's how I think it would work best. Potato, burrito, a quesadillas, no, a whole case of them. But is it... and then if you want to do, manifest your will that's outside the will of Dad, then you need some additional help, right? And I talked about that even this morning. But one of the ways to do that is to enlist the help of other supernatural beings, such that you can get them to do some things that you wouldn't normally let it to happen. So here's some thoughts I've had about that. And again, this is observation. Here's some of the things that we certainly see is, and this is again some ideas I wanted to share with you guys. I felt like I was just thinking through, listening to Globebusters doing some stuff today. So let's see what you guys think about this. Right, one of the things that we have talked about on numerous occasions is wave theory, and because we consider, at least many of us, right, and some of this is certainly just within the realm of quote physical sciences. This is a field that I've worked in for a long time, is having to do with wave propagation, and so waves, whether they be transverse or longitudinal, we'll look here at a transverse wave because it's easy to see the idea that if this is the if that's the center line or the absence of energy, when you begin to add energy, you've got amplitude, which is how much energy, right? And then frequency, which is how often it occurs. So if it's a wave, right? Wave is a perturbation, a repeating perturbation in a media. So this is the media, flat perturbation. You begin to add energy of some kind, this energy here, and then what happens is that, right, that it goes to the other side of the waveform, and then it comes back up and it does this, and right. So that's a sinusoidal wave. Basically, this is the positive side of the wave, and this is the negative side of the wave, and then this is the center line right here. What we do, so the frequency is the period between here and here. That's how often does it occur? How frequent? How frequently do you mow the lawn? Once a week. It's the time period. It's how an event occurring over time. Amplitude is a measure of this part right here. How much? Right, and so the amplitude usually is measured in some value. And if it's sound waves, we would say it's usually measured in a scale called decibel. And a decibel is a logarithmic scale because there's so much variance there. But some of them are just a linear scale, right, which moves up. You might measure volts in amps, or you might measure it in how many volts. Right, so in electricity, you might measure it in volts and amps. There's ways to measure amplitude, right? Amp, how much. So and so amplitude is a measure of energy, how much it's moving, and frequency is how fast it's going, how many times. All right, and so this is so sound waves don't actually travel like this. This is actually a transverse wave. The way sound actually travels, right, is that air is the media, and so it's an air pressure perturbation, and so it actually emanates. If you were to look at a two-dimensional, it actually goes in three-dimensional. But it emanates from a point source here. Right, and it goes out in 3 dimensions like this. So whether you were looking at it from the top or from the side, it does that. If you're then, if you consider this as the ground, right, what happens is this is what we call, as soon as you have a ground, a plane, this is what we call an acoustic half space, such that this now down here doesn't matter, right? So if I switch this to eraser and say, whoop, none of that down there matters, right? So come back to our little thing here. All right, so now the acoustic sound only happens in this space, but what happens is from the bottom, right, the sound that came down here now bounces up and does that, right, and it's kind of a little bit out of phase, and so so that's the sound wave happening there. If you were to look at it from the side, let's clear all this out here. Okay, so if you look at it from the side, then what happens is this is a sound wave perturbation, right, and so then these are your amplitude here like that. It's pushing, and it happens to what's called compression and rarefaction. And so as the energy happens, right, there's an energy, something moves, it pushes where they say air molecules, but whatever it is, the media, it pushes it. We can even say water. Sound travels through water, but it pushes it out of the way. So it pushes it this way. What happens is, if you consider the idea of molecules or bits and pieces of matter, the energy hits this. And what happens is it then moves until it strikes another one. And when it hits the other one, it passes that energy onto that one and then returns to its original position. Much like you see a pendulum, right? You push it this way, and once it reaches the top of the arc, then it comes back and goes that way. That's the same thing that happens here. The energy hits this molecule or whatever piece of ether, but in this case, it's a media, air. It's actually air, or water, right, or a solid object. Actually, sound travels faster through solid objects because the molecules or whatever are closer together. Right? So they're closer together, so they don't have as far to go. So that energy is actually transferred far more efficiently, and it moves faster and further. In the ocean, for example, blue whales can send their sounds many hundreds of miles because it's so powerful, for one, and two, because the denseness and compact material, the denseness, relative denseness of water, sound travels, one, much faster, and it goes very, 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 very far. Because the energy is preserved, right? So conservation of energy. And so this is what we call compression. This phase here, when it moves forward, is compression. And then when it hits another one and moves back into place, this is called a rarefaction. And so if we were to look at it here, and I have my scriggly drawings here, it's not very precise, but this motion here, this area here is compression, and this is where you would have a leading edge then of a whole bunch of molecules of sound, and then a gap in between, and this is the rarefaction, and then a leading edge of a whole bunch of molecules here, right, as the energy moves like that. And so if you were to look at it from a side slice from this, right, so let me get the eraser out here, and we'll, get rid of all that stuff here. Blah, 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 blah. All right, so come back here. And then, so if we were to still have the sinusoidal wave here, right, like that, if we were to look at it from a slice here, so as the energy got, this is the most energy here. If you were looking at it from the side, this is where you have the most molecules. This is where you have the least. Back here again, the most. Right. But it's not easy to see it that way when you're recording that sort of stuff. And so we typically represent it as a transverse wave instead of a longitudinal wave for that reason. Let's then see if I can just clear all this stuff out. And then, all right. So that's the basics of wave theory. I hope you guys are class is following along. I'm not boring you to death. But waves and energy is pretty much the way that we think of everything, how the world works. And so everything moves in energy and waves. That's the nature of it. And so the same thing happens with other energetic waves. For example, unlocked content has been deleted. Oh dear. You see, it's my first board here on this online whiteboard. And so one of the best, one of the things that we talk about, for example, is electromagnetism. And the interesting thing about electromagnetism, right, is that they're related. And so as electricity, say, moves in its sinusoidal pattern like this, right, what happens is along a 90-degree axis, you've got, and so if that's flat like that, now figure a third axis. So you have this axis and this axis. Now consider this axis, right? So you have now this one in 3 dimensions. And so this then would be the polarity of the magnetism, right? Moving on a right angle to it, right? So like this and then that. So one's moving up and down, the other one's moving side to side like that. Does that make sense to you? Again, there are, physics examples, I probably could have found some quick GIFs to demonstrate that, but there always is that related material. And so this is one of the things we talk about, and many people talk about, for example, in terms of the world having polarity, which, really, I see it as having balance, right? So that there is this this back and forth, but it's polarity rather than duality. How about that? I think that's a better way to describe it, that you have these things. And so there is balance, right? So for every action, there's an equal and opposite reaction, but there's also related motion. So what am I getting to? Well, this need for balance comes to mind because then we have, remember, if we get into alchemy then, right, we have the elements, we have the 4 elements, we have fire, I forget, water, and I forget all the symbols, air, right, and I forget which is which, right? I don't dabble in alchemy too much. So fire, air, water, earth. Anyway, so you have these 4, right? And then you have the 5th, which is the quintessence. I can't remember. Anyway, so you've got that 5 elements. But the thing is, if you come back to the idea of balance, then you have this, right? So you have earth and water and earth, right? Earth and water, okay? And so we have earth is to fire as water is to air. Okay, and so these 2 are in relationship as those 2 are in relationship, and then these 2 are in relationship like those, and then those 2, and then those 2, right? So here we have this lovely balance. It's beautiful balance, and we see in nature. There's no lie in nature, we know this. Now, what do we do with this quintessence, this essence, the luminiferous ether, right? And so, the ether, right? So Millington, this is what we would consider that all matter is created from the ether, right? And so we've had this conversation. I think most of us are on board with this premise. It's not a new idea. This is nothing groundbreaking that I'm just covering the material so you understand the basis of what I'm talking about before I jump off the bridge here. All right, so with this idea then that each of those things has its balance, right? So remember this little thing, we had earth and water, and fire, air, right? And the balance is between them. There's a balance here, 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 here. It's a perfect balance. But then you've got this number 5. Well, that's all right. Oh, hey, wait a minute. So what do we do with that? So now we've got this sort of. So now this is the luminiferous ether, and this is from matter, right? This is the energetic means from which all matter is created. All right. So, but this would need, if I've got this right, and I'm thinking this through, the balance, right? It needs balance. Okay. So. Then you could say, oh, well, there's the positive and negative, right, flow of that. But that would be, well, then you'd still need material and immaterial, wouldn't you? And so this is what this thought I had today. Work with me here. Tell me I'm crazy, or see if this rings true to you, because there's reasons I'm getting here, right? So let's think of then again the same axis. If we have the ether then working on this axis, this is the energy of the ether, right? In the same way that we would relate electricity like this, then the other thing would be magnetism. What's magnetism? I think this is the immaterial, and it moves in an oblique way across that axis, and it's tied to it. And therefore, it would explain, now working here, just some, the idea that material things have a spiritual energy to them. Well, in this case, they would have to, right? They'd be tied together. They would be an intrinsically tied spiritual aspect that is a mirror, but an oblique mirror of the item itself. That every physical object has a spiritual component to it, right? And then every spiritual component would have then a physical counterpart as well, so that all things have a counterpart. And this would, here's another thing, right, would explain in a way, if you understood this principle, and then here would be some of the implications. If you wanted to work, let's say, magic and manifest, remember this is, we're working in the ether here, right? So this is the fifth and sixth of these elements. So 5 is quintessence, but 6 is sextessence, okay, so, but it's the related one, right? So it's absolutely related. It's intrinsically connected. It cannot be taken, disconnected. So that everything with the physical aspect has a spiritual aspect. Everything with the spiritual aspect has a physical aspect. In the same way that everything electrical has a magnetic component. Everything magnetic has an electrical component. And when electromagnet, when you create motion, you get magnetism. When you introduce electricity, you get motion. It's the same principle. And so if you're then introducing energy into the material sense, then you've got this etheric, or again, both are working in the ether, but these are the two aspects of the ether. There's the physical aspect, and then the non-physical aspect that then works on the cross axis obliquely. And a huge implication this would have is if you had ideation to express intent, right? So then you're think of it this way: your thoughts, then, if you're thinking of it, your thought process, right, is that you have an object here, and you say you want to move this object. So you're thinking linearly this way, and so here's you, right? And they're bad eyeball, and there's my little goatee and some glasses, right? It's bad. I don't really have much control here, but you're looking this way. And so you want to express energy. This is your intent, your will, and you want to move that way. If you have but the faith of a mustard seed, you can cast this mountain into the sea, and it will do it. And so I'm going to say, I have the will, I have the energy, I have the intention. I want to push this thing that way. All right. Well, you're pushing your energy this way, but just like all the other laws of physics, and so again, if you'll follow me here, the reason I got here was because really all the study into water, and Victor Schauberger keeps saying, I keep hearing his voice ringing in my head saying, if you want to know the truth, right, study nature and copy it and duplicate it if you can. Figure out how it works and do it. And so I'm like, all right, what do we see? And everything has its balance. Everything has, it's not even equal and opposite. It's the intrinsically linked, and it seems to be linked on this oblique cross axis. Same way we have earth and air and water and fire on these cross axes that are intrinsically connected. Okay, and electricity and magnetism that are intrinsically connected on the oblique axis, the 90-degree axis from one each other. So if you think there's here, right? So 80 and 90 and 270, and then you've got this oblique axis running third, right? Like that. All right. So you're trying to follow along. I'm so sorry. I'm so sorry. All right. So again, I'm trying to show that there is an intrinsic link. This is at least the thought that I'm having today, this intrinsic link between the spiritual and the material. But if you think in terms of, again, material, you're trying to cause energy here. The thing is, you're kind of wasting energy because all things being, if for every action, there's an equal opposite reaction, right? So then the energy that you're putting out that way, you're trying to manifest that, there's going to be a natural pushback, right? It must come back in the same way of compression and rarefaction. And so you're kind of pushing against the universe like this. However, right, if you understood some of this energetic stuff, and if you understood magic, again, if this is true, I'm kind of speculating right now, but I'm theorizing and speculating based on what I see, is that, for example, then if you were to take an oblique angle, and so instead of coming at it this way, let's say I came at it from this way, right? All right, so I want to push it this way, but I have to not look at it. So I'm going to get here. I'm looking this way. It's here. I want it to go that way, but here's what I need to do. I need to push this way, understanding that the oblique angle moves in that direction. I even kind of can't look at it. It's got to be off to the corner of my eye, right? It's that 90 degrees right out, just off in your peripheral vision. You can't directly look at it. It's misdirection. And so if I push this way, right, so here's what happens. You get the same energy in this direction, which then moves here. When this pushes back, as it will, right, then turn your energy ever so slightly in this direction, and now you've caused an arc. And this arc of motion is now going to push again the item into the direction you want it to go. Right, so you've got energy coming in this axis like this, and it's creating energy across the axis like this, right? So I want to push this thing this way, but what I do is I push a little energy across that axis, which then causes this ripple effect to go that way. And when I get the push back here, all I have to do is create the little energy to go that way, and then it begins to spin. So imagine a compass needle, and it's garbage. All right, so imagine a compass needle, right? And it is pointing and spinning, and so you push a little bit from the bottom to get it to turn to the side. And so if this idea is correct, right? And then the controllers, if they know this, they get everybody kind of sort of pushing in the wrong direction, right? So you're trying to go after the thing, directly after the thing you want, and it doesn't work that way. You see, what we've seen to discover, right, and many of us in, I don't know, some of us, in a small group of us, I guess, in the Christian community, I don't even consider myself a Christian, but we had this kind of idea that there's no waste in God's economy, right? Everything Dad has made is for a reason, and that everything he does, ultimately, again, these ideas of waves and energy and constant motion, ripples from long ago, right? This karmic stuff comes back, that you sow, so shall you reap, all this sort of stuff. Everything you do has an action. And there's this complex web of energy that moves out there. And so everything that you do has ultimately consequences. Okay. So in this energetic fabric of this quintessence out there, so for every material object, there's a spiritual reality that accompanies it, and it's always connected to it throughout the life of that thing, even its material components. So whatever the material components are, the spiritual aspects remain. And this again would give you so much insight into why a place has a vibe and energy to it, because there's a spiritual aspect to it. And so anything that's occurred there is going to leave this mark. So consider that when you go to, for example, battlefields like Gettysburg, you can sense it. You can, almost overwhelming, right? And even if you don't know what's happened in places, you can go there and sense something really, whoa, out of the ordinary there. Often there is some intelligence behind it. If you're sensitive to it, you can tell that there is an intelligence behind it. But sometimes it just seems to be, an energy component. I think this may be in part why. That, again, if we're looking at this fifth component, this fifth element, we just then add a sixth, right? So each one has its balance. And so this quintessence, this fifth element, right, would then have its, whatever, call it the inside out, but the magic component that goes along with the material, right? But they're interconnected. So one runs on this invisible and physical aspect, and the other is this emotional. And C.S. Lewis kind of called this the law of undulation. And I think, again, he was onto something there with it, that man is both spiritual and physical, right? And so that we have these biorhythms that occur. And so these, the way he looked at it was two different rhythms, and sometimes they would fight against each other, and sometimes they would complement one another. But I think, right, here's what I'm on to, here's what I'm thinking here, is that these energetic patterns, it is this sidelong pattern, or this oblique scalar waves, if you want to go there, right? that that this is, again, the impact. This is the energetic field that the stars impact, right? And so when we talk about the constellations and the movement of the planets and the stars, planets, wandering stars, the influences that they have, I think this is what the element that's going on, right? And I think, again, I've talked before about how I kind of consider that if you were to toss grass up in the air to see which way the wind is blowing, this is how divination works. But I think this maybe explains it better. If one of these is the material axis, one of the physical axis, then you look at the physical axis, certain aspects of it to determine what's happening in the spiritual aspect, right? But that's the overview. But if we're looking at specific physical things, any physical object then has a spiritual component to it, tied to it. And then that's true for every single thing. Every single thing. Your lighter, right? Your pack of cigarettes, your car. There's a spiritual vibe to it that is connected. It's intrinsically linked to its experience. And I think this also would well describe what I find in my research of water, that water contains memory, right? It is this spiritual component. And how do you quantify that? Right? How do you quantify a spiritual component? I think it probably now is linked to this physical aspect. And I think that the two are intrinsically linked in this way, directly, not just sort of indirectly like an overlay or two separate things that are intrinsically linked on this oblique axis in the same way that magnetism and electricity are linked. And so that that's why you have these direct impact, and that's why I would say the controllers or whatever work so hard for that karmic shrugging, because they don't want the material impact of what they're doing here in the energetic field, right? And so this also, again, I think if you consider the idea of doing the oblique rather than the direct, you also stand a much better chance if you can create that turning motion, right, to keep things turning. Then you can create a constant cycle of turning in this whirlwind, and that's where you get order out of chaos. You get a direction. You basically create a whirlwind effect of positive and negatively charging elements of society to fight against each other. And as each one does, as each one fights and pushes and pulls against the other, it's each one are on oblique angles to each other, so that the whole thing creates a swirling vortex effect, right? And all you got to do at that point is sort of push it, and it goes in the direction you go. It just takes that tiny little nudge. And if you've studied, take a look into gyroscopes, right? And so when you have gyroscopes spinning, then if it's on a rod, you can hold it out. It doesn't matter if it's 50 pounds. You can hold a spinning spinning wheel with angular momentum, right? If it's got enough angular momentum, you can hold it out at a direct parallel angle, and it doesn't take any energy at all. In fact, you can't even hardly change it because of the nature of a gyroscope's need to be rigid in space. The property of it's rigid in space. And so it creates that effect. So if you're doing that effect with society, right, with things, right, and so you're affecting things by then again, here, go back to here, right, and so you're nudging along an angle. So you want to push something in this direction. What you do is you start in that direction, you focus here, and as you do, the spiritual pushes it in the oblique direction. You're not even looking there, and so nobody sees what you're doing. You're pushing that way. It starts to go that way. The pushback, again, is in this way, and so when that happens, right, you go a little bit that way, and that turns the pushback on this one that way, and so now you're nudging in a direction. But if you create polar forces in society, one positive and one negative, and you get them to fight against each other, and you have one over here and one over here, and you get them to fight against each other. Now you've created circular motion, and this creates energy. And so now you've got this vortex, right, of energy that all you have to then do is ever so slightly nudge, and the whole thing takes on this motion. And so, again, I got here from the idea of Victor Schauberger's study of water to study nature, copy nature, and look at what it does. And what I see is that everything has to have a balance to it. There has to be this balance. And so transverse waves have the longitudinal that's connected to it, and scalar waves. And so if there is this fifth element, this quintessence, then it seems that and if that creates physical matter, it seems there must be that oblique angle, and that to me I think is the spiritual world, and that would explain so much about tying spiritual aspects to physical things, that you could imbue physical items with spiritual properties, right? That these have that there are relics, right, that have these. Hey, thanks to Baldini art. I know it makes no sense whatsoever. But that's, anyway, that's what I'm thinking, guys. And so I'd love some feedback from you. Put it in the comments, send me an email. If what I said made, one, any sense to you, and two, if it has some other ring of truth to it. And so, again, if I can summarize, the best way I can put it is this. All right, for every action, there's an equal and opposite reaction. We see the universe in terms of energetic waves. You've got amplitude and frequency. So amplitude that way, frequency this way, the distance here. When you have this axis, there also is this axis as a flat plane across, right, like that. That's linked in the same way that you can look at electricity that way and magnetism moves that way, and they're linked to one another. And I think that is what's happening with the ether, luminiferous ether, but it is these two components. One of them is matter, and one of them is antimatter. Now, material, immaterial, but that immaterial, that spiritual, moves in an oblique but directly related way to the material itself. And so everything that happens to material has a spiritual impact. Everything that has a spiritual impact has a material manifestation of it. So this would be true for thoughts and emotions as well. There is a material manifestation of the non-physical event. Process that one for a while. I would love for you to get back to me. And so with that, I think I'll leave you to ponder that. I missed a request earlier this morning to rap with More Than I've Ever Seen, and I haven't, I didn't see it, and so I played something else instead, because that was the one that somebody had requested still the previous day, and so now I'm going to come back. Well, we'll just play whatever you want. Approximately what you call it's from called symbology, right? And I think I think it's intrinsically linked to sigil magic as well, right? That there is these energetic properties to physical things, and so if you understood, and I'll be honest, I don't. I mean, I understood. I think I understand the linkage of them, but not. Which one does, if you knew the frequencies, I guess let's do it that. Same way with Royal Rife. If you know the frequency of sound and light, you can affect the material matter. Well, the same thing, I think, would be if you knew the frequency of an energy of each event, then you could dial into it and understand what's happening. And so I think that when you get these big, disingenuous designation events, when you get those things, again, those physical manifestations then have an impact on the spiritual, right? Because of those waveforms of energy that are then guided. So the material event has a spiritual impact, right? And so if you want to achieve a spiritual goal, there is a material manifestation that happens. That's what I'm saying. And it's linked intrinsically. It's not tangentially linked. It's intrinsically linked at an oblique angle. Oh, no, I was going to play More Than I've Ever Seen and rap along with it. That would be awesome. I did rap. I first heard rap in like 1981, 82, from a friend of mine from New York. And so I thought it was nobody. I lived in Texas at the time. Nobody had ever heard of it. And me and my buddy would do it over. We were white boys, and it sounded hideously white, but yeah, I know, right? It's funny. All right, More Than I've Ever Seen. Thanks, guys. It's always great spending time with you. Thanks so much for being here. Let me know in the comments or send me an email what you think of this wacky idea that I presented you with. the intrinsically connected material and immaterial worlds. It'd be more than I've ever seen. Have a great day, guys. Love you.
Still burns inside with a light that I cannot hide. I walk on the edge of time, ride the winds of destiny. I hear the thunders coming, bringing me to my knees, like nothing I've ever seen. In my mind I hear the voices calling. In my mind I see the planets collide. In my mind I feel the end beginning. It's like waking up from a dream. It's more than I've ever seen. Shadows fall like angels' tears, leaves darkness on every shore. The season's morning light inspires me no more. Seems more than I can endure. If I walk this final mile, will love be waiting there? If my feet are on solid ground, can I reach my dreams